Tonight on Sharp End, I'm at a Conservative conference where everyone's awaiting the big speech. No, not the Prime Minister on Wednesday, Boris Johnson tomorrow. Good evening from Manchester, where the Conservatives are as unsettled and as uncertain as the weather, apparently, and where the Welsh Secretary Alan Cairns tried to send a message of unity in his conference speech. Owain has been at a conference too.
The Conservative leader may be under a bit of pressure, but I'm back from the UKIP conference where they chose their 5th in 12 months.
Yes, there's a strange atmosphere here in Manchester, really, for the party that won the election, well, at least came first in the election. They're pretty downbeat, the half-empty hall most of the time, and in stark contrast to the euphoric atmosphere that the Labour Party saw at last week's conference. So we'll be discussing all that throughout the programme. First, though, we turn to events in Catalonia and the violence there following a standoff between Barcelona and Madrid over an independence referendum. Oh, and you've been looking at this issue, haven't you?
Yes, their intention reached boiling point yesterday as the Catalan government pressed ahead with their bid for independence in the face of fierce opposition from the Spanish state. But with reports of around 900 people injured, this crisis is escalating quickly. This was the response from the Spanish government everyone feared, but few expected the level of force used. The Catalan government organised a referendum on their future, with their leader, Carlos Puigdemont, insisting a yes vote could lead to an unilateral declaration of independence. But the Spanish government insists the poll was illegal, and Prime Minister Mario Rajoy says it's against the country's constitution. He defended the decision to use force to try and disrupt the poll as tensions ran high.
What does this mean? History. I have no other word, it's just history. It's changing everything right now, in this minute.
Today, the Catalan government met to discuss their next move. But these scenes, in the heart of a Western European country, will prove highly uncomfortable viewing across the continent. Well, let's see what my guests make of the situation. I'm joined this evening by Darren Miller, Stephen Kinnock and Caroline Jones. Well, welcome to all three of you. Darren, if I can start with you, those scenes there in Catalonia, do you think the Spanish government have acted appropriately here?
Well, I think they're pretty dreadful scenes, and I, for one, have been very surprised at the Spanish government's lack of restraint, frankly. I am concerned about what's going to happen next. I think it's really important that all parties sit down and actually start discussing matters with each other, rather than putting people on the streets that can cause that sort of disturbing footage.
Stephen, we've heard the EU's response, some critics there saying they could have been stronger. Do you think that maybe the EU could have done more here?
I think that nationalism in Catalonia peaked in terms of its popularity in 2013 at about 49%. So it would have been much better if Madrid and Barcelona had had a dialogue, allowed a referendum to take place, but with all the facts on the table. There should have been a constitutional convention looking at all the options for the future of the Spanish constitution. And I think if the option had been between a federalised Spain and full independence, I think the people of Catalonia would have voted for a more devolved system. What they now have is, I mean, the Prime Minister is playing right into the hands of the nationalists and increasing support for independence. It's a very silly move on his part.
Should we be accepting the result of this referendum then?
Well, we believe that people should have a say, so we believe in having a referendum if sufficient people are asking for a referendum. But the level of violence that has escalated now in this has been unprecedented, and I don't think it makes comfortable viewing. It's very unacceptable.
Darren, should we be accepting this referendum result then?
Well, you know, you have to question the extent to which people were properly informed about both sides of the arguments for independence. And, you know, as Stephen's quite rightly said, there wasn't a proper debate before this referendum was held. We know that some people would not have had the opportunity to vote and would have been put off by what was unfolding yesterday. So I think, you know, we've got to be cautious about this. People need to sit down around a table and start talking to one another, and we need a peaceful resolution to
Stephen,
the
there's been
situation.
discussion as well, hasn't there, around a unilateral declaration of independence. If Catalonia went down that route, should the UK government then recognise Catalonia?
No, I don't think that the referendum is valid, because when you've seen scenes like that on the streets, you can't really assume that everyone who may have wished to vote would have been too scared to go on the streets.
Yeah.
So they need to sit down, have a proper conversation, and people, for example, need to answer the question, what would happen to Catalonia's relationship with the European Union if it were to secede from Spain? We know that the Spanish government would never allow Catalonia to rejoin the European Union, and yet support for the European Union in Catalonia is extremely high. So let's get people round the table, have a proper constitutional convention, and then have a proper referendum on that basis.
And Catalonia's independence here inevitable, do you think?
If sufficient people vote for it, yes. But as you can see, a lot of people have been put off voting because of the scenes of violence here. So you haven't got a true result at the moment, because, as I said, people have abstained from going out, and wouldn't we all, you know, really? So there has to be communication between two governments.
There we are. We'll have more discussion in a bit, but now it's time to head back to the Tory conference and to Adrian.
Thanks, Owain. Here in Manchester, the Welsh Secretary, Alan Cairns, has been calling for unity behind the Prime Minister, to get behind her and her position in the Brexit talks, get the best Brexit deal. That would have been a long shot, to be honest, if he'd just been asking the Conservative Party. But he went further, calling on the First Minister to drop the idea of a more federal UK.
As we leave the European Union, the union of the UK is more important than ever before. So exiting the European Union is a time when the nation needs to come together to secure the best deal for every part of the United Kingdom. Yet, Labour in Wales are pursuing an agenda which aims to derail Brexit. The First Minister has even been described as standing shoulder to shoulder with Mr Barnier. A duplicitous approach when Wales voted to leave.
Duplicitous, eh? Well, was that helpful or not? I wanted to know when I spoke to the Secretary of State a little bit after that. It's not very helpful to call the First Minister duplicitous, though, is it? He's not going to want to work with you with that kind of language.
Well, I don't criticise the First Minister very often. Since I've been Secretary of State for a little over 18 months, this is the first time that I've criticised him in such a way. I've got a good working relationship with him. We get on pretty well, and I'm going to continue to work with him to get the right Brexit deal, because that's what businesses and industry is calling for.
Given that, do you really, in your heart of hearts, think, as you said in your speech, that the First Minister is trying to derail Brexit?
Well, that's the tone when he's standing shoulder to shoulder with Mr Barnier, when clearly this is Team UK, if you like.
He's just trying to get the best deal for Wales, isn't he?
Well, I think that job is down to David Davis and to Theresa May. Effectively, we're trying to negotiate for the whole of the United Kingdom. Wales stands to take benefit from the new opportunities that are there. That's what I want Wales to do. We have an obligation to act on the referendum outcome, and he needs to remember that Wales voted to leave the European Union.
The problem is, though, that isn't he right to be worried that there is a power grab, in his words? You might not like that language, but let's not argue about the language. That there are powers that are going to be devolved back to the UK that should be going to Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, and they're going to stay in London.
Well, I don't accept that accusation for a second. We're having retained EU law because business wanted to come back to the UK.
So they will stay in London?
No, they won't, and that's why I want him to work with us. The approach to the leaving the European Union is constructive. We want it to be inclusive. I work closely with him in a whole range of policy areas, and I want him to engage in a positive way to deliver the right outcome and the best outcome for Wales and every part of the country.
The problem is, it seems as though you don't trust the Welsh Government or the Scottish Government, because if you agree that it should be devolved and then you should work together as the UK Government, you could devolve and then come up with a framework.
We're negotiating with the European Union. We need the best deal for the whole of the UK. The best way to get that is to maintain the same rules and regulations that we've got, because that gives confidence to the European Union that we're not going to undermine their industry or undermine their business or agriculture. This is what business have been asking us to do. The alternative could be to have 4 regulators, where if we've got one pan-European regulator to stand, and that would be 4 regulators in the UK.
You lot, and by you lot I mean the Conservatives, are just as divided on you on Brexit. We've seen different emphases, different opinions being expressed here at the conference and beforehand.
Well, I sat at the Cabinet meeting on the day before the Florence speech, where the Prime Minister gave her address that pleased many European nations. There's been a very positive response to that. The Cabinet was absolutely united behind the vision she outlined.
Was it her vision or was it Boris Johnson's vision?
We all went through the speech line by line, where everyone contributed in a constructive and positive way. Okay. Boris Johnson that you mentioned has said that he's absolutely united behind that vision, and it's about getting the best deal for the whole of the UK, and that's why I don't want the Welsh Government to try to undermine it.
I just want a quick word about the Welsh Party. You know, Andrew R.T. Davies described armchair generals directing things from afar. What did you make of that?
Well, I haven't read the article, but I can understand that the Pickles Review has taken many issues into account. I think that many people recognise that the campaign was too centralised at central office
armchair generals?
Central office in London, where they were directing the sorts of messaging. I think we've learned an awful lot from that. I certainly have, and I want to continue to work closely with Andrew R.T. Davies and the Assembly team, who do a great job in challenging the Welsh Government. But clearly this was a UK election, and I think there are probably better ways we can run it, and there are lessons we can learn.
Could one lesson that you learn be about a single Welsh leader, a particular figure who's in charge of the Welsh Party?
Well, the party constantly evolves, and Byron Davies, the former Member of Parliament for Gower, is now the chairman of the Welsh Party.
But a single Welsh leader?
Well, Byron Davies is the chairman of the Welsh Party, only just been elected. He and I work closely together. We're going to work closely with the Assembly team and, of course, with the Westminster team.
Do I take that as a no?
Well, this is something that constantly evolves, constantly that will reflect the reality of the situation on the ground. We want the right thing for Wales and for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that includes the Conservative Party as well.
Cairns, thank you very much. Thanks. So there you go, plenty for you to discuss throughout the rest of the programme. That's it from Manchester, and the conferences take a breather until Plaid Cymru. I must say I'm pretty relieved about that. I'm beginning to feel like Alan Partridge living in hotels. So back to you and your guests, Owen.
Get into the warmth, Adrian. Get into the warmth. Well, the Tories weren't the only party with a conference this weekend. UKIP headed to the English Riviera for their annual gathering, with delegates choosing Henry Bolton as their new leader in Torquay. But many were left asking, Henry who? This is the man UKIP hope can rebuild the party, Henry Bolton. Never heard of him? You're probably not alone, as he's never held an elected office or a senior position within the party. A former soldier, he now has the task of whipping UKIP into shape.
Without being united, we cannot lead. We cannot lead the nation, and we cannot hold the government to account, and we cannot achieve our core purpose at all.
Since last year's Brexit vote, UKIP have been struggling for a purpose, with regular squabbling over their future direction. And you get a sense here that survival is now their main aim.
It's going to be very difficult for the media to treat him with disrespect, and I think that's what we have to have now, a very solid, good, experienced man at the head of the party. And I think this man is going to bring that, I really do.
UKIP's leader in the Assembly, Neil Hamilton, offered an early bit of advice, suggesting the ways of the party in Wales should be followed across the UK.
We're actually a template for what UKIP will be doing once we have finally got out of the tentacles of the EU in years to come. And we'll need to do this in the United Kingdom. We'll then be operating purely in a domestic political framework.
But one UKIP AM isn't sure the current party will survive into the future. Will UKIP exist in 5 years' time, do you think?
Politics is so turbulent at the moment that I don't have any answer to that. I can't look into a crystal ball. If it didn't, there would be another party on the right of the spectrum in Britain that would certainly be a force, if not UKIP, something else.
The new logo you have chosen to represent us is this.
As part of a relaunch, they unveiled this new logo, which many have compared to the lion from the Premier League. And UKIP are desperate to stay in the big time and avoid relegation.
So, Caroline, Henry Bolton, is this the last throw of the dice, do you think?
No, I wouldn't say that. But what I'm saying is that I think Henry Bolton is going to be a credible leader. No, he's not a career politician, which I think is to be welcomed, because when I've looked at his CV, it's very impressive, and he has extensive life skills. And
But not elected office. Does that worry you that he's never been
No,
a politician?
it doesn't, because when I spoke to him on a one-to-one, I was very impressed at the way that he's going to take UKIP by the horns and put it into shape. Hasn't said all about his plan at the moment, but he's given you a brief insight into it. He's coming to Wales on the 17th of November, and I think that's credible too, because he wants us to be part of his plan.
Darren Miller, UKIP look a bit more united than the Tories now, don't they?
Well, look, they're in the last chance saloon, aren't they? You know, they've gone through leader after
Rubbish.
leader after leader. And we've seen the party falling apart here in Wales, not fielding local government candidates, squabbling over leadership in the Assembly, and two of their members having left the Assembly group. So if that's the sort of template that Neil Hamilton is suggesting the party follows UK-wide, I think they're in for a bit of a disaster.
Coming on to the Conservatives, Alun Cairns today with quite a strong attack on the First Minister, claiming that he wants to derail Brexit. What's the basis of this?
Well, look, you know, we've got to be working together between one end of the M4 and the other when it comes to these Brexit negotiations which are taking place. I think it is important that Wales has a voice in those negotiations, and that the Welsh Government is also engaged by the UK Government in taking those negotiations forward. I know that that has been happening behind closed doors, and I think it's a shame sometimes when we hear criticisms coming from the First Minister which don't always bear out the close
Stephen Kinnock, this is something we hear quite often, people saying, well, the First Minister is quite supportive behind closed doors, and then comes out and says different things.
Well, I thought the Alun Cairns interview was extraordinary because he was talking about the importance of the union and then called the First Minister duplicitous. I mean, that's hardly a basis for strengthening the union, which we do need to be as we move towards Brexit. But you know, I think what Cohen is doing is setting out a vision to ensure that we put jobs first, that the Welsh economy, which depends so much on foreign direct investment and on access to the single market, gets the best possible deal for Wales. And the Tory government is an absolute shambles on Brexit. They spend most of the time negotiating with themselves rather than with the European Union. So at least we've got to have one grown-up in the world, in the room, which is Cohen.
But that's fair enough, isn't it? He's the First Minister, after all.
Well, look, people are entitled to hold different views, and governments in Wales and Scotland and the executive, if it's ever reformed back in Northern Ireland, are entitled to hold different views in the UK government. But when it comes to doing a detailed negotiation with 20-odd European nations, it's really important that the UK has a united front. So it is a shame sometimes when the UK is seen to be pulling in different directions as a result of some of the squabbling that goes on.
And Caroline, where do you keep stand on these powers?
On these powers, well, we want every power that we currently have to come to Wales, obviously, but we want Wales to be prosperous. We want it to prosper from us leaving the EU, and we think we will, because we think there'll be more money in the pot for Wales to do all the things that it should have been doing in the last 20 years. But because we've had the same old story from the governments that have been, the Labour government that's been in power, we haven't achieved our best for Wales, and that's what I'm concerned about doing, achieving our best.
And then on Boris, finally, is he being helpful at the moment?
Well, I think it's been interesting to see the debate that's been taking place, both within and outside of the Cabinet. I think what people want to see in the UK is a government that's united, that's getting the job done, and that will get the best deal that we possibly can.
So no, then, is it?
We'll take that as a no.
You can take you can interpret my answer however you want.
OK, there we are. Well, tomorrow the Welsh Government unveils its draft budget. Finance Secretary Mark Drakeford will tell AMs how much each Cabinet Secretary has to spend. And we promised Welsh land transaction tax rates for the first time, this replacing stamp duty. We don't know a lot about the detail, but we do know it will get passed, as a deal has been done with Plaid.
You'll see a lot in the budget agreement where we've tried to prioritise projects in North Wales, in West Wales, and in parts of the valleys as well that haven't had a fair play in terms of financial support in recent years, but also sectors like tourism and agriculture, of the economy that have been underinvested in, and then areas of public service like our universities and colleges, and also the mental health services.
So, Stephen, this stamp duty change that's happening, being devolved, do you expect some help for first-time buyers here? What should the Welsh Government be doing here?
Well, I think we've still got to see the detail emerging, but the first-time buyers issue is absolutely critical, and I'm sure that Mark Drakeford will be looking at that very closely, and anything we can do to encourage first-time buyers getting a foot on the ladder, very important indeed, yes.
At your conference, you spoke about the pay gap, you spoke about tuition fees. Isn't this the chance for the Welsh Government, a Labour Welsh Government, to actually do something?
Well, the challenge we have overall on public sector pay is, of course, it's based on the Barnett consequential. So,
but it's priorities, isn't it? If that's such a priority for the Welsh Government, they should be doing something about it.
Well, I mean, we have the instruments we have at our disposal is what's given to us by the Westminster government, and because of years and years of a wrong-headed, mean-spirited and totally, utterly self-defeating austerity programmes of the Conservative government, Wales is bearing the brunt of that. And tough decisions have to be made, of course, across the Welsh NHS, of course, public sector pay. But in the end, we've only got the size of the pie that we have to deal with from the Westminster government.
Well, of course, the Labour Party would say that, wouldn't they? But the reality is that for every £1 that's spent on the National Health Service and every £1 that's spent on our schools, the Welsh Government receives £1.20 as a result of the financial settlement that it has with the UK Government. But it doesn't spend £1.70 on those services. For the NHS, it spends about £1.07p. So there's plenty of cash sloshing around. It's all about priorities, and I'm afraid the Welsh Government has the wrong priorities.
Caroline, we do know as part of this, what, 40 million being spent, an extra 40 million on mental health, 20 million extra on higher education. That must be welcomed, shouldn't it?
It is to be welcomed. The mental health area has been suffering, and we know that more and more people are suffering from mental health issues, so that is to be welcomed. What I find difficult to understand is Stephen saying about austerity and about the Conservative government. When the Conservative government took over from the Labour Party, there was a note left in the safe, and it said, there's no money left in the pot, good luck anyway. Now, I find that a cavalier attitude from the Labour Party to pass on to the next incoming government, and I find that unforgivable.
So we've had 7 years. We've had 7 years of Conservative government. Between 2010 and 2015, £3 billion was cut from the block grant to Wales. I would love there to be a magic wand that could be waved and that would deliver the funding that that we need for our public services. But if the purse strings are being tied up in London, there really isn't much more you can do about it.
You have to let me challenge this, because of course the Independent National Audit Office, the Wales Audit Office, the King's Fund and a whole host of other organisations have pointed out the fact that while NHS spending was rising in England, rising in Scotland and rising in Northern Ireland, the Welsh Government was the only government, the Labour government here in Wales, that actually cut NHS spending in the last
Because we invested in social care. As we know, for the NHS to work properly, you've got to have synergy betwing social care and health services.
But we also know that we wait longer for our operations, we wait longer for our tests.
We have known for years that there's going to be a shortage of nurses and doctors in Wales. Foreplanning is of utmost importance. It hasn't been forthcoming from the Labour government in Wales. I want to see more action and less promises.
There we are. Unfortunately, time has beaten us. That's it for this week. You can get all the latest on Twitter, where we are at Sharpend ITV. We'll be back next Monday. Thanks for watching. Good night. You guys.